This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. Good morning and welcome here. I am joined this morning by Bridgette Davis, a public policy professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, investigative journalist, and the lead of the investigative team at the Shoestring, Dusty Christensen, and Greta Jochem, investigations editor at the Springfield Republican newspaper in Springfield. Good morning, everybody.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, today on The Rundown, public records in Massachusetts. What is it? How is it supposed to work? How it's actually working in actual practice from investigative journalists who might be using it to dig into stories. Those questions and so many more we will tackle today here on the show. If you have thoughts, you can email therundown@nepm.org or check us out on our YouTube live stream. All right, let's get into it. The headline. They don't even pretend to comply. Mass agencies, cities, and towns openly flout the open record law. Quote, it's among the worst states when it comes to public records access. That's according to one Freedom of Information expert who spoke with the Boston Globe. This was a story reported in March 2026 by John Hilliard of the Boston Globe. Quoting, for nearly 2 centuries, Massachusetts law has guaranteed government records are open and accessible, but a Globe review has found the state's public records law has often proved to be a promise written in sand. The Boston Globe loved it so much, they wrote a little song about it. Let's give a listen. I love it so much.
I didn't know they did that.
There's a video on Instagram. It's a little hand puppet of a records request. Little nod to Schoolhouse Rock, I'm guessing. Yeah, we'll have a clip to it, or a link to the clip in our show notes if you're curious. But, you know, on a serious note, going back to the point that was argued by the Globe, the state's public records law has often proved to be a promise written in sand. Dusty, Greta, as you, as journalists, have used the law, has that been your experience? Greta, I'll start with you.
Yes, definitely.
In what way?
I saw that headline, was it a month ago or so, in the Globe, and thought, like, wow, that that resonates with me. Yes, a lot of struggles to get public records, and just the lack of teeth to the law comes up a lot, I would say.
Yeah. Dusty, how about for you?
I think it's really surprising to people. I teach journalism at UMass Amherst, and when I tell my students that we are among one of the most opaque states in the entire country when it comes to access to government records, they're shocked. They think Massachusetts has this legacy of being progressive or transparent, and when it comes to public records, the opposite is true.
When John Hilliard dug into it a bit. He said, in Massachusetts, the state's laws, deadlines for fulfilling records requests can be ignored, which is a 10-day, right? You send out the request, they're supposed to respond within 10 days. But it's even a little open to interpretation there, right? What is a response? Is it, yeah, we got your email? Or, you know, as journalists might expect, we're going to want those records. He goes on to say workers can conspire to overestimate costs. It's kind of up to interpretation. Elected officials can spend years fighting records in court, which we've seen here locally, or not bother releasing records at all, which, Greta, you've got some experience there, as do others. No one tracks whether local governments like cities and school districts follow the law. State agencies self-report requests, but not the reasons why they refuse them. The law carves out gaping exemptions for the governor, the judiciary, and lawmakers on Beacon Hill. The 2 state agencies that share responsibility of enforcing the law, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General office, are either hamstrung or disinclined to intervene. Enforcement in practice falls to individual requesters. Bridgette Davis, they fall to individual requesters. What do you make of that?
I mean, with the exemptions and with the fact that this takes a lot of follow through, there are no accountability people for this. There's no one that the accountability points to. And so it does fall to individual requesters to stay on it and then to blow it up if they're not getting what they need. And that's really tough on citizens and reporters and people who are trying to make things public. And it's also like not ideal for a city worker or an agency worker who also may be trying their best to, in some cases we actually don't, we don't know what's happening with a lot of these agencies and towns and cities are underfunded for over many years now, especially since federal tax cuts have reduced money that comes down. And so when you think about like the worker perspective, and also that we've had a really large generational turnover over the last 10 years with boomers leaving the workforce and these public sector jobs, and we often haven't replaced jobs like secretaries, administrative assistants, et cetera. We're relying on tech to do a lot of things. We've had probably 4 to 5 system migrations if you think about the onset of using computers. Like where records are, where those records are held, I think we should assume it actually may be a lot of effort, and it may be looking in multiple places, and that we don't necessarily prioritize funding positions where records, especially because the law kind of can be skirted, we don't fund a position where those someone's attending to those records. And I think that makes it with no kind of person that's a point person.
Yeah.
Who's going to do this?
Yeah, it's a huge question. Dusty, you spoke with an independent journalist, Andy Kumer, who sued over his records request that went unfilled and then was. Tell us a little bit about that piece.
Sure, yeah. Andrew Kumer runs a news blog called The Mass Dump, is a frequent public records requester, and tried to get documents from our local district attorney in Hampshire and Franklin counties, the Northwestern District Attorney, about possible misconduct or credibility issues that police officers had. These are important documents district attorneys have to keep so that if a police officer testifies in court, they can introduce that as potentially exculpatory evidence for the defense. It took Andrew years to get hands on these records, and the only reason Andrew was able to actually get them in the first place is because he was able to secure pro bono legal representation to sue the district attorney's office. Ultimately, a judge ruled in that case that the DA had to turn over those records, but so many of us don't have, as reporters particularly, the resources, either in our newsrooms or individually, to sue an agency to get records. And even if we do have those resources, that's a years-long effort in order to get really basic transparency. Whereas in other states, there is somebody, we have a supervisor of records in Massachusetts, but she currently has no teeth in her agency. And so other states do have that. Those agencies can start fining a district attorney or a police department or what have you if they're not complying with the records law. We have none of that in Massachusetts.
And there was a relatively recent change to the law that says you can get your attorney's fees back, but you got to lay out the money first. And if you're putting that on a credit card at 24% interest, that is not something that everyone can do, nor should they have to. All right, let's take a look and kind of zoom out a bit and take a look at what it takes to make investigative journalism happen. Oftentimes, you're relying on these public records requests to support or help you generate this story. Greta, you are now the investigations editor at the Springfield Republican, but you've worked for the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the Berkshire Eagle, other newspapers in our region. We have so many. We are very blessed here in Western Massachusetts to have so many news outlets that do take the time and the effort and ultimately the money to dig into stories like this. Give us a sense of how investigative journalism differs from daily reporting.
Yeah. So I would say the main difference would be your reporting on information that's not easily found or easily accessible. So daily news coverage, which has so much value and is so important, might be going to a protest or taking a press release about some kind of announcement from the government or the school, something like that, and reporting on it. Where investigative journalism tends to take more time and tends to, you have to dig a little bit more for the information, and often that involves a public records request, kind of key.
Yeah. Dusty, for your part, you also worked at the Daily Hampshire Gazette previously. You're currently the investigations editor at the Shoestring. There's risk to this work, right? You're going to go to an editor and say, I have a hunch. I was given a tip. I have a gut feeling that there's something here and we need to dig into it. But ultimately, you might come up empty-handed.
That's right. And we do try to sort of mitigate that as best we can as editors, making sure that we're pursuing stories that will have some sort of conclusion to them that we can publish and inform our readers with. But to your point, investigative reporting for those reasons is really expensive. You have reporters who normally would maybe be reporting 1, maybe even 2 stories a day, sitting on one story for a month, maybe even sometimes a year or more, and that all takes up resources. And so obviously when we have a public records law that delays that even further, I think it really does put a strain on news outlets and our ability to tell these really important accountability stories.
For you, from a public policy perspective, Bridgette, when and where are you looking at these investigations to sort of fuel your work or maybe even spark something that you might be interested in taking a closer look at?
Well, it's interesting.
Or are you?
So it's interesting. I think from my perspective, our students are often really interested in public records, because often those public records could provide, right, a lot of data and information that about why legislators or about why towns or about why agencies are making decisions. And that really, right, when they're thinking about doing research projects and they're preparing to work for public service, they want to understand, like, what's the data that people have behind? What are the incentives that a legislator is thinking about when they're making a decision or voting for something? And our voting records, right, are not even completely public in the legislature. So I think that, like, when I think about it often from my student perspective. And then I think about it from the perspective of, since I study kind of the lived experience of policy, right? Citizens can't put pressure on people if they don't know how or why their legislator is voting, the representative is voting for a very particular thing. And I think that, like, to me, there's an interesting window around votes, at least at the state level, the votes being a key piece, that if those were open, actually lots of people would have an incentive to make all the other records open, because then they'd have rationale on the record.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think you may have voted for XYZ state rep or senator, understanding they stumped on this or that issue, and now, 4 years into a term, you're making the assumption that they're still voting that way, or the way that you thought that they spoke about it on the campaign trail. But to Bridgette's point, you have no way to fact check, or very little way to fact check.
Very little way. Yeah. Very little way. Only no votes, I think, is what we get published. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have very little way to hold people accountable to whether they're actually there voting or whether they're voting for something that you really want.
Yeah. One of the things that Adam Chaplin from the Massachusetts Municipal Association told the Boston Globe, let me back up. I think there's frustration on both sides of this, right? Mm-hmm. Journalists are frustrated. Maybe people in the public are frustrated if they're following this. Certainly lawyers who are trying to get access to these records. But on the other side, as I started to say, Adam Chaplin, who's head of the Massachusetts Municipal Association, who represents a range of cities and towns across Western Mass, they're frustrated too, because to the point you were making earlier in the program, Bridgette, that there maybe is one support staff person, one secretary somewhere who would be tasked with filling this request. They might not have the time in the week to do it. They might not exactly know where they need to go. And so, he's saying that these problems are difficult for those folks too. It might not be just they're stonewalling, which there we do know from public records requests that there are certainly plenty of instances of that. I think there was one case that the Globe reported on that the records request accidentally gave them access to an email where people were conspiring to say, hey, let's make this request a little more expensive than perhaps this newsroom can stomach, and then maybe they'll just go away. But I think there are people who are honestly just stumbling with it too, because it's a challenge. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. More to come on the rundown on 88.5 NEPM. We are going to take a look at some more in-depth examples from some of our investigative journalists here around the table. You are listening to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM and streaming on YouTube. I'm Carrie Saldo. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo, joined by Bridgette Davis, a professor of public policy, and investigative journalist Dusty Christensen, and Greta Jochem. Let's get right back into it. Greta, a headline on a story that you reported in March: one of the worst offenders. Why it's hard to get public records from the Mass State Police. Your reporting found that the Mass State Police received almost 14,000 records requests last year, the largest number of requests compared to every other agency that reports to the Secretary of the Commonwealth here in Massachusetts. The state police provided records to the requesters within the same quarter of the year, only 1% of the time. What got you curious about this topic?
A public records request, actually. I went back, and so last spring, I made a request to the state police for information. Like, I was just curious about police dog bites, and was looking for their policies on police dogs and records if police dogs have bitten anyone. I have no idea if they have. I have no evidence. I'm just curious.
So looking at canine dogs, right?
Yes,
That's fascinating.
yes,
I would
yes.
love to know.
Well, I still don't know. Made that request, didn't get a response. Appealed to the state secretary, and they said, you guys got to respond. And eventually I got a response saying, sorry for the delay, we're working on it. That was in July, I believe, and I followed up a couple times, and just haven't gotten anything. So that sort of
July of 2025.
Yes.
Wow.
And the last time I followed up was September. So it's been a couple of months. But that sort of just reminded me, like, oh yeah, this is an issue that I and other reporters and public policy people talk about often, that this is an issue. And so then I sort of got interested in doing a bigger picture story.
What did the state police say in response to maybe why they hadn't got back?
Yeah, definitely. So they get, like you said, 14,000 requests. That is a lot of requests. And often there's information in those documents that is not public because there's many exemptions under the law. So if you could think about like a police report, someone from member of the public's sort of individual information might be in there. So that's one reason, and they just get so many, and that they can be quite complicated.
And I really appreciated in your reporting that you pointed out, state police are not alone in this slow response rate. Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition pointed out that they have a lot more power. One of the challenges of the slow response is that they have a lot more power than other public agencies, and that secrecy can be a lot more detrimental. Specifically, one case that you learned of in Springfield or spoke about in your piece of Raymond Champagne. Tell us a little bit about what happened with him.
Yeah, so Ray was a Springfield native, and he was incarcerated in the 70s for a robbery. And while he was incarcerated, there was a homicide in the prison, and he was convicted of that. And he got involved in the public defender's innocence program. A lawyer was looking into his case, and when she made public records requests to the state police for documents related to the homicide, the murder, her requests were denied. She was really struggling with the state police to get the information she was looking for, and then I think 5 or 6 years later, the prosecutor's office voluntarily handed over the documents that showed that there was another man who had kind of admitted and sort of alluded to that he had set Ray up and sort of framed him for it, and so he was exonerated actually.
And so Lisa Kavanaugh, the defense attorney in the case, was saying, look, he spent 6 extra years in prison because of this, but I would argue he spent even more because had this case been adjudicated properly the first time and the case had records turned over in a timely manner, perhaps he never would have been convicted of this in the first place. Wow. So I think it just really speaks to the importance of when these requests are made, having them released in a timely manner. Dusty, in 2023, you reported for NEPM, actually, on 3 different police departments, Holyoke, Amherst, and Northampton, and found that they rarely discipline officers when civil complaints are filed by the public. Tell us a little bit more. Give us a summary kind of what that reporting found.
Sure, and I think that reporting sort of speaks to the uneven response times that different agencies can have. Me and Greta, when we were at the Daily Hampshire Gazette, started digging into, after the Black Lives Matter uprisings of 2020, state lawmakers in our state passed a law that, among many other things, opened up police misconduct records to public records requests in a way that they hadn't been previously. The idea was to shed more light on this issue of possible police misconduct. Greta and I decided when we were at the Gazette to test that law to see just how much police departments were actually going to turn over those records. We put records requests to Amherst and Northampton, which, to their credit, quickly quickly turned over those records, and pretty much in total. Holyoke Police, it was an entirely different matter. It took a year and a half, about 18 months, for them to turn over misconduct records to me. And what those records ultimately revealed is that the police department almost never disciplined police officers when a civilian had complained about them. This is for behavior ranging from rudeness during a traffic stop to out-and-out violence and brutality against people who had been arrested. And so these are really important allegations that need to be investigated. Ultimately, what we did learn is that the police department wasn't disciplining people for civilian complaints. We were able to learn that because of that records request. But again, 18 months, we spoke with an attorney, Jeffrey Pyle, who often handles public records lawsuits and things, and he said that that basically amounts to resisting transparency is the way he phrased it. So these are important stories that need to be told. We need to know how a police department, which has the ability to take away your liberty and maybe even your life, is investigating its own officers. They are the ones who investigate themselves. Already, there's a lot of conflicts of interest there, clearly. And as reporters, as the public, we need to be able to shine a light on that process. When we have to wait 18 months to do so, a bit of democracy dies with that, I think.
Here we are in 2026, though. Have you had any examples of police departments approaching these complaints differently now as a result of the change in law and kind of your reporting that dug into it?
I think that 2020 law did change the way police departments have to track that information. You know, the Holyoke Police Department was tracking complaints against its officers on a piece of paper that they hand wrote the results on. I'm assuming now they do that in like a machine readable spreadsheet format, which as a data reporter we love. I love a good CSV file. But you know, the challenge still remains, particularly with police departments. Some are better than others, but in many cases, I often find that the police departments are the slowest to respond, the most hesitant, and are very frequently citing exceptions to the public records law that, at least me as a reporter, I think are unwarranted.
Fighting for access definitely goes beyond police departments. We've seen it at the federal level, whether it's the Trump administration trying to limit journalists' access to the Pentagon and how the Pentagon is covered, who gets to sit in on a White House press briefing. Those are some national examples. But coming back to Massachusetts, we've seen a push-pull between state government, local government, whether it's environmental issue. I mean, like, name an issue and there's a push-pull for records, right? Bridgette, but you found one example where a charter school, which are publicly funded with tax dollars, pushed back, and the Attorney General, in this case, Andrea Dewar Campbell, took them to court. Why did that case stand out to you?
I mean, I think it stood out to me because schools actually are usually pretty good about public records, honestly. And they understand that they're stewarding not only public dollars, but they have children in their care. And so, you know, even when it's tough, when it's disciplinary records, even when there was even pre-George Floyd, lots of attention to a school-to-prison pipeline kind of things, right? Even in contentious issues, schools have been pretty forthcoming. So this one really caught my eye because I mean, I'm glad the way that things have ruled, but like it's a very it's shocking to me actually that a charter school would. It does not shock me that they would consult with their lawyer. It does not shock me that there would be things that would not be fully accessible. That's very common,
right? Because there might be sensitive personnel issues. There might be students' names
right?
Involved.
Exactly, and they're definitely, like, in any of these cases, right? The police departments, schools, agencies are talking to their lawyer and they're coming back, and they're talking to their lawyer and they're coming back, and they're figuring out what they can disclose and what they can't. That's a totally normal process, and that makes a total sense. But to fight this, I think, I mean, I guess I'm glad it's completely on the books that charter schools are in Massachusetts required to comply. And I guess maybe we shouldn't be shocked that a charter school would try to make some kind of different case, that they're like quasi-public. But I mean, I'm glad we're at where we're at, where they're accountable.
One of the things that was interesting to me to see AG Campbell take this up, and she said after the case was ruled in her favor, quote, "My office took this case to court to enforce the public's right to access information under our public records law. So fantastic in that particular instance. However, we haven't seen the office sort of bullish about perhaps helping journalists. Now, I could hear the AG's office also pushing back, saying, like, my hands are tied here. The law doesn't exactly help me necessarily chase this issue. Whether or not we would agree with that around the table, right? All right. Well, moving forward, I want to check in about where each of you sees this issue headed. Greta, I'll ask you first.
Well, there has been proposed legislation, many sessions, and it doesn't seem to have gone anywhere. I would hope, it would be great if the state could give the supervisor of records a little bit more power to enforce the law, and perhaps just more training and resources towards some of these small communities, especially like, small city halls, town halls, to help them better fulfill requests.
Dusty.
I do know there's some ballot questions that could be before voters in November. I'm not quite sure where those are at the moment that would open up the public records law a little bit. We need to do something because the governor promised she would be more transparent than any governor previous and then is not adhering to the public records law, saying her office is exempt. Our state lawmakers, our judges get to do the same thing. We're the only state where all three of those branches are exempt from the public records law in the entire country. So I don't think we're going to be able to rely on lawmakers who have not passed reforms that are moving this issue forward in a big way. And so I'm eager to see where these ballot questions go if they do get on the ballot in November.
Bridgette Davis.
I'm thinking about the policy window we have right now, right? Which is that we can actually openly say that like bad governance can be wide open. It's not always hidden. We're seeing that in the public right now. And so we can want this for lots of other reasons, not because we think something nefarious has happened, but because we want to be more engaged in our democracy. And there's the pro-democracy moment right now that I think, in Massachusetts' 250th year too, we can think about that. But also trust in legislatures and governments is historically low. And so I think that we could be putting a ton of pressure on the elected officials right now to actually shift some of these things, starting with maybe publishing votes, which I think would be the kind of lever point, because I think lots of other things it'd be desirable for them to be published.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a big moment, but I think it's going to take a ton of public engagement. And so I think if you care about this, you should be in touch with your representatives, your town, but mostly with the state legislature. Yeah.
When I talked to Justin Silverman, the executive director of the New England First Amendment Coalition, he was saying something similar to what you brought up, like who this is important to and why it's not just journalists and lawyers. It's many other people. He talked about the stakeholders who are interested in this. Let's hear a little bit more about what Silverman said about the stakeholders.
These are issues that all of us need to be concerned about. It affects all of our lives. These are public agencies using our tax dollars to operate in a way that may or may not be in the public's interest. And the only way we can find out one way or the other is to request and obtain the information we're entitled to under the law.
All right, that's our show for this week. I want to thank our rundown panel, Bridgette Davis, Dusty Christensen, and Greta Jochem. As always, you can email us therundown@nepm.org or check us out on our YouTube live stream. The Rundown theme is courtesy of the Love Crumbs. Our director is Tony Dunn. Our board op is Kara Foster. Production support and digital by Ayu Suryawan. Thanks to everybody in the booth. I'm Carrie Saldo. You have been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM, and check us out on our YouTube live stream. Have a great one, everybody.